Connor, what's going on?
Doing well, man. How about yourself?
Doing good, man. We're going to do a deep dive today on the differences between SMB, mid-market, also referred to as corporate sales, and enterprise sales. In particular, I wanted to make this because this is something I wish I had about 3 years into my career when I was making that transition to enterprise sales. I definitely got caught off guard the first 6 to 12 months as to some of the differences. And I know a lot of the people we work with are asking those as well as they're preparing to make that transition to enterprise AE. Not only wanted to have a conversation about my experience, but Connor's been at Oracle for 6+ years. Everything from SDR to SDR manager to now enterprise account executive. You've literally seen all of these yourself as well. And for everyone's reference too, if you're in a situation where you're looking to make that move to enterprise account executive, we're going to have just more of a conversation here today, but I'd love your feedback. Let me know if there's topics that we missed or things that you want us to expand upon more. And we're definitely open to doing a part 2 of this as well. But Connor, you've seen a lot, I guess maybe narrowing the scope of our conversation. Like when you think about some of the differences between mid-market, SMB, corporate sales, as opposed to being an enterprise account executive now, what are maybe 2 or 3 things that immediately jump to your mind?
Yeah, so I think like that first big jump is from SDR to account executive, and people don't realize that that jump from being an SMB account executive to even mid-market up to enterprise, I think is almost as big of a jump. Yep. However, I would say 80% of the core principles that make you successful as an SMB or corporate account executive still apply in the enterprise account executive role. There's just a few different things about the sales cycle that change. One, if we're going right into specifics, is I think access to power at the enterprise level is a lot harder. That's what catches you off guard. If you're a SMB or mid-market account executive, oftentimes you are just used to those decision makers being on the first call. You're used to easy access, whether it's the CFO or even the founder of a company is on the call with you. And the way I view the sales cycle, just stepping back, like I've always viewed it as the first half of the sales cycle, my job is to motivate the buyer, get them interested in going through the cycle itself and getting them to see the potential. And then the second half is about actually enabling them and making it happen. What I find is in the SMB space, it's easier to motivate and get them interested in something because you have the access to power a lot easier oftentimes, but then it's harder to actually enable them. And I think it's reverse in the enterprise space where it's actually harder to motivate them because they're slow, they have their processes in place. They're honestly thinking about mitigating risk a lot of times. They're already big, successful companies. A lot of people who take on these projects, they're not the actual decision makers, they're executive sponsors you work with, and they're almost staking their careers on these initiatives sometimes, especially like what I sell oftentimes are big, heavy, enterprise-wide financial management systems or HR systems. And if they take on a project like that, they sign off on it and it doesn't go well, that's like a huge risk to their brand and their career at that company. Yep. So those are some of the things that pop into my head. The big one is it kind of flips in SMB. It's a lot easier to get that access to power and motivate them, where in the enterprise side, you have to get a lot more creative, and oftentimes you get to that enterprise space, you're all excited, you've crushed it as an SMB account executive, and that's just a new skill set that you have to develop.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, there's a lot of great nuggets there that we can continue to break down, maybe said a different way. I think we're kind of saying the same things. And from my perspective too, we both sell rather technical products that require heavy amounts of implementation. I think in the SMB space, everyone is much more aware of the problems that exist within the organization. There's a very clear destination that they're going or trying to get to over the next 12 to 24 months. And there's very clear reasons as to why right now they can't get there. And it doesn't mean that you're a shoe-in fit. Like obviously there's competitors that will say they do the same things more or less, but it's much easier very quickly to get to the root of the problem and get that buy-in. And to your point, whether it's on the first call or whether it's on the second call, you pretty much have the economic buyer there for, I don't know, companies up to 250, maybe 500 people, maybe sometimes 1,000 people. That's a little bit of a stretch, but you can get there pretty quickly. And I think I got overconfident because I discounted how simple that was. And I was like, well, I am getting to power, but it's a different game when you're selling, 3, 5, 7 levels down in the enterprise and strategic side. And to your point, maybe also going, this is a little bit technical and kind of like in the weeds a little bit, but on the point of risk mitigation, I'm sure that you can solve someone's problem. I'm sure in theory that your product does something that they don't have right now. The actual time at the enterprise and strategic level to see that value is minimum 12 months in a best case scenario, and realistically 36 months. And I'll also tell you, personally selling like a very heavy DevOps automation level tool right now, there's also other realities that come into play at the enterprise side. Like at the startup side, you have very focused teams. They maybe have one product line and they know what they need to build. When we're getting to the strategic side and we're trying to have a solution that helps several potential stakeholders across different units within the organization, there's actual talent shortages. Like the best companies in the world that aren't Facebook don't necessarily always have the best engineers in the world. So even if we gave you access to this tool that allows you to deploy your infrastructure in a distributed architecture worldwide, does that person who's been working on on-premise legacy systems since 2004, are they actually the person that's ready to go cloud native Kubernetes right out of the gate? And I'm just pulling up some specific terminology from my industry, but I think there's a lot more complexities that go into the enterprise side. And this is not even taking into account the relationship aspects, which I would argue are much more important on the enterprise and strategic side. But I think from a technical reality, it's like, I prided myself on being a rep that knew my technology very well, better than the average rep. And that worked really well in the SMB and mid-market space because the CTO and the company as a whole is trying to move 1,000,000 miles an hour and gain more market share, beat their competitors. Whereas the enterprise side, it's like, oh, your tool does that? Cool.
Yep.
Like step one of 2,000 has just been checked off, and it's just way more complex. I'll pause.
And I think there's a lot of politics that are involved in the enterprise sales cycles too that you don't get oftentimes in the smaller SMB organizations. You were just mentioning on-premise applications, for example, and that struck a chord with me because I work at a company where we have on-premise applications but also a cloud application suite, and it often makes sense. Like you can spell it out for enterprises why it makes sense upon renewal to go from this old on-premise model to the cloud model. You can have your ROI case buttoned up right in front of them. But there's things like there are entire departments at these enterprise accounts who have staked their whole careers on being the people who are the experts and the masters of this on-premise system. Exactly. So even if it's good for the business, you have to fight different factors like that where they're like, I've been the VP of IT here for 20 years and all I know is how to do this. If we move to cloud, like that's a risk for them and their career at the company. And that was a big wake-up call for me because I didn't really experience that in the SMB space. That in enterprise, I was like, whoa, you can really spell it out for people, but there's a lot more variables and factors at play in the enterprise space.
Yeah, and I think even like thinking about champions and a few things that come to mind in no particular order, kind of thinking about relationships here, right? If you are selling from the ground up as opposed to top down, there's validity in both approaches. I think I'm gonna stay focused here. There's so many things I want to talk about, but like on the technical champion side, let's say at an SMB company, you find a champion that is ready and willing to test it, to show leadership what they've done. You get away with that much more at an SMB type of company because they're still building this while they fly. That's one point that we talked about. But maybe highlighting in depth what you haven't experienced yet in the enterprise side is you could find that 30-year-old that's really trying to make a name for themselves, that ultimately wants to become a director and maybe even CISO or CTO long-term at the company, but they've never actually bought software within the organization before. Yeah. And I've seen this where they even do a demo and I naively give them a demo, get them successful and think that that's going to get us in the door. And then this person actually falls flat on their face because they go to leadership and say, hey, over the last 2 months, I use this free trial to build out a demo that shows we can do X, Y, and Z. And their CTO at this 40,000 person company is like, so you've been working on that when we've been telling you should work on this. And on top of that, you've been working on something that wasn't even approved from a security and compliance standpoint to build out a test that may or may not align with our initiatives. Like, why didn't you bring this up to me sooner? And or like, you've never even bought anything here, like stay in your lane. And so I say that because I think, for those of you that are in that SMB and corporate space right now that are having success building rapport with those champions and having them kind of guide you, you have to do a lot more vetting, and you have to be a lot more skeptical of champions on the lower level as well, that they can actually meaningfully do something. If they haven't purchased anything before, if they're not bringing other people to the table, they're probably not serious. If they're so naive that they think they could do a trial within a month and then purchase that within 3 to 6 months, they have never bought software at their organization before. So another point I'll pause.
I guess building on that, what have you done to combat that and prevent those situations where you think you have a champion, you rush to the demo, you think things are going well, and then some other key decision maker you didn't even know was in the mix comes out of the blue and is like, what are you even doing working on that? Like, how have you proactively gone about preventing that from happening in the first place?
Yeah, let's take two sides of that, because I think one, if you are getting to that point, you're probably too late, if I'm being honest. So how do I get in front of that? If I am selling bottom up, which is not ideal in the enterprise and strategic space, if I am selling bottom up, not saying that this is the preferred way, but if they can't identify who those people are and get them on the call within about, there's no exact science to this, but within 3 to 5 calls, if we are talking about the same thing, they are asking for a trial and refusing to bring anyone else until they do that, it's dead. Conversely though, what do? I make it a point and build this into my discovery workflow when I'm on these different calls to make sure that, like, if we have a successful discovery call, if we have a successful demo, I get if they don't want to bring a leader in at the early stages of that on the enterprise side, because we're working with a 12-month plus deal cycle here. That's okay, right? And that's different than the SMB side. Sometimes you actually don't want to show a demo if they just like filled out a contact us and they don't want to tell you anything else. Sometimes you don't do that. In the enterprise, you do have to take a lot more of these introductory calls that may or may not go anywhere. But let's say you find someone that's like, I do want to drive this up. I do want to bring this in. There's so much value here. You have to get to a point where, and again, build this into your workflow so you don't even think about it. Like, make it a non-negotiable step as part of your discovery and sales process. Like, hey, so I want to learn more, like call 1. I want to learn more about what you're doing today. Purely just understanding their world. Call 2 is maybe a follow-up and a teaser of the platform. Call 3 is like a more in-depth demo. By call 2, when I'm getting into that second call, it's like, hey, really appreciate it. We want to clarify a few more things, show you a little bit of the platform. The goal would then to be to show you a custom demo based on everything you've told me. What I would like to do though, by the time we get there, is bring in everyone who would like a say and would have a stake in this, product being brought in. Because if we show you something and miss key criteria from others, I've seen that backfire on us and we waste the next 3 months of our lives doing this. So that's the bottom up. One thing I'll say, I don't want to take too much floor time. I feel like I'm talking too much. But top down, this is a huge difference. And quite frankly, like, I'll call the younger generation out for not being willing to do this. But I think going on site, like if you're, or this could be at the company in their office, or getting those people to different events, whether it's, making that introduction from managers, VPs, even the C-suite to get them to these events. Even if you don't directly get FaceTime, get those executives out and about, build a game plan as to how you're actually going to get FaceTime, ideally directly, but through an executive, through a VP of a strategic contact. Find a way to pick their brain and understand what's important. It doesn't mean like in one conversation you're going to get everything, but if you are, as an example, like I know both of us work with people who are already using our software, and we're trying to upsell them further products, obviously to their benefit. Getting on site, making sure, like, even if it's a quarterly cadence of, I want to visit you every quarter, twice a year, when you get there, that's the opportunity to, offer them lunch. They may decline that, but say, hey, we are traveling to Toronto. I'd love to at least get 15 minutes of your time to make sure, we're aligned to you. And those are the opportunities that the average rep that first gets into enterprise, they stick in their comfort zone. They want to just do those Zoom calls. They want to move through the process, and they miss all of these different things. So there's a ton more, but
No, I think that's good advice. And a lot of people just get trapped going down, like they think they have a champion, but if they can't start to clearly communicate like what their buying process looks like, and it's just the same calls over and over again, they sound excited, like alarm bells should start to go off in your head. I think though a lot of times you do have the right person, but these people just haven't, to your point earlier, bought software at the company before. So sometimes I think it's on you, the account executive, to start recommending what those next steps are going to look like and being consultative. A lot of times these people want to make things happen. They just don't know what their buying process is. So starting to recommend, like as an example, if I'm selling a financial management suite, if I'm just talking to finance, like eventually I'm going to need to also talk to IT, and we'll have an architecture and performance call and explain exactly this is what's going to be covered on that call. And personally, I like to oftentimes have those calls separately. That's more of a strategy on my own at first. Because a lot of times the IT people will dominate the discussion if you're trying to get. So once I have those business conversations and those processes, the pain points fleshed out, that's when I'll go to IT and we'll start talking architecture and performance. But things like joint execution plans, as you've done the upfront work, you've put in the work to teach and build credibility and trust, and you've reached a certain stage of the sales cycle, there reaches a point where you need to start asking for things in return and being prescriptive as to here's how this process plays out. We've worked with many organizations like you. This is what we need to have covered. Recommend like architecture call. We'll bring in an implementation partner. They'll start discussing resourcing and time commitments at different phases of the implementation. If you're not getting into those nitty-gritty details and you're just talking high-level value, like after like 5 conversations, not a hard number, but alarm bells should start to go off in your head, especially at the enterprise level, because it's never just the line of business leader that's making the full decision here. It's going to be a few different LOB leaders.
Yeah, I'd love to pick your brain too, maybe on the spot. Like if you think back to one of your first deals that you lost in the enterprise space, like obviously anonymous details, like what's a hard lesson that you learned when you first got into the enterprise? I know we've talked about kind of some of the problems, what to do, but like what's a very real example of how you maybe naively lost a deal early on as an enterprise AE?
So it was a scenario where I was working with a champion who was very pro Oracle, what I was selling, and thought every time we would have this conversation, they were in IT and we were trying to sell the full financial management suite, but I was really just talking to this person in IT who presented themselves as the head decision maker. And I kind of naively kept going through the sales cycle, really only working with this person. And there should have been alarm bells going off in my head that I had never met with anyone in finance, but I was assured they were not going to be an important part of the decision. Yeah. Learned later in the cycle that finance leader had extensive background and had implemented and used one of our competitors that I also knew was in the deal, and just got blindsided at the end. Like I really thought it was going to be a deal we won. There were a few other factors at play, like there was a selection partner involved that was helping with the evaluation in the middle, and I should have been able to pick up on some of the questions that were being asked. They were kind of geared against our solution and more towards our competitor. It was almost designed to hurt us in our responses, and I just never seen that before. But I was single threaded, and I after that, once I could feel the deal starting to fall apart, I realized I had no one else to call besides that person in IT that I had. I couldn't call that CFO or any of those other people that were involved in the decision. Yep. And I just got happy ears. I thought I had the person who was in charge of making the decision, and they were just like one piece of the decision.
Yeah, and maybe just like, trying to make this really real for people who haven't experienced it yet. Because this is the problem with this, and I think that's an amazing example, and I'm probing further. Like I got blindsided similar fashion, and this is something that exactly that, like, you're optimistic, you just got in that enterprise AE role, you finally made it to that enterprise role that you've wanted for a long time. You're 6 months in and it hasn't happened yet, but it's gonna happen. Like, describe maybe in more detail how quickly this fell apart. Forget the discovery and stuff that we talked about, but like make it real for someone who hasn't experienced this yet.
So I had weekly cadences with this person and the selection partner. We were going through our typical sales process. Like we did our discovery phase, we got to demos, everything was going according to plan. And then all of a sudden, even my champion, who we were on a near texting basis, just went silent. Like, really? And yeah, all of a sudden couldn't get in touch with them. And it like in 1 week just fell apart.
How far in are we at this point? Like
probably
4
or 5 months. Yeah.
Okay.
And the final decision was made about a month later. They distanced themselves, and eventually we just got a note from the selection partner that they'd moved on. Yeah. It was 0 to 100 in terms of going well to I can't even get in touch with this person. I've been on a texting basis anymore, and I have no one else to call in the organization. Yeah. And I was like, I am never making this mistake again, because the amount of effort that went into that sales cycle, the amount of opportunity cost that could have been going to other things, had I just pressed earlier on to get more of those stakeholders involved, and also, quite frankly, pressed back on some of that selection criteria that I should have been able to recognize was positioned against me. I could have gotten out of this cycle a month in, as opposed to there were early mornings, late nights, weekends work going into this that could have gone to building other quality pipeline. And I had a lot of work to do to catch up after that. And it was probably the most damaging sales cycle of my career. And it was also the first one I had in the enterprise space.
Yeah, and at least speaking to a similar experience on my end too, it's like the other side of this too is, especially if you're that new enterprise AE, like you will get labeled as inexperienced, because in addition to the effort that you're expending, you're also pulling in SEs. You're convincing, you're convincing architects and consultants and people on your team that this is a real deal and they do need to get this done by Wednesday, et cetera, et cetera. And then when it drops out like that, it really
there's
compounds.
Internal brands like you run lots of these sales cycles as an enterprise account executive. You're pulling in solutions engineers for all of them. They're all balancing their own deal cycles. They want to work with the people who understand and believe are going to get the job done. And when you expend a sales cycle like that, where you're telling them everything's going well, they're like, we're putting everything we can into this deal, and then it falls apart like that, it can be damaging, because next time there's a sales cycle and you want them to prioritize your deal, they remember the last one. So there's a lot of reasons why, it's important to understand this stuff. But I was going to make that mistake one way or another. I'm glad it was early on, because I've made it a point to do my best to never make that mistake again, never end up single-threaded, especially in the enterprise space. You can get away with being single-threaded at times in the SMB mid-market space, but even there you don't want to.
Yeah, 100%. Also diving in, I know we've talked about flavors of this, but I think this is a really great thread to keep pulling. So you talked about in the future, you probably would have disqualified this about a month in, just also for your approach, right? I think we've talked about our styles a little bit different, a lot of similarities. What did that change, and why would you have been able to disqualify that now in the future? What are the things that you're asking or the things that you're doing that identify that this isn't real?
Because I knew in the end, once that cycle fell apart, that the decision had almost been pre-fixed based on that CFO and the other people in the finance department's pre-history experience. So I know, had I pressed back on some of those requirements, like why are you emphasizing this and not this, and the selection partners getting difficult, there's just telltale signs. Like if they're not willing to budge on anything and they're just keeping things, I'm not going to go as far as to say rigged, but positioned against you, that's when you can start asking harder questions about why that's the case. And if they're not giving you good answers, if I should have been asking to get in front of that finance team that I didn't truly understand was part of how important they were in the decision. But had I done that, based on what I found out later, they probably wouldn't have given me the time of day. And that just would have been a red flag. Like, I'm not about to commit all of this time I'm going to spend and my team's time if you guys are going to keep these requirements that are basically positioned against us, and you're not going to spend time with us knowing you are spending time with the competitor competing in this RFP. And then it just becomes a risk reward thing. Like, then if I had no other deals in my pipeline and that was an absolute must win, maybe I would have just tried to pull that back in and actually win the deal and get them to get more engaged. But that wasn't the situation. Like, I would have just pushed that one aside, been like, that's going to the competitor, and focus on other deals that I can drive more quality pipeline for.
Yeah, 100%. I think like one of the things that I changed as well, again, like in this example, I don't think we ended up winning the deal. We ran into some complexities, but I think like one of the things, similar experiences, definitely some battle scars there. And like to everyone watching, like to some extent this is unavoidable, but hopefully giving you this muscle memory. I know it's a lot of what we talk about in AE Mastery as well, is like, don't take me as the guy that says process will cure this problem. But I think when you go from that SMB to enterprise space, you grab on what's comfortable. You're thinking about the discovery calls that went really well in the SMB space. And if you're not working these different components in, you have to, like, it is a non-negotiable when you identify a potential fit to ask about buying process, to ask about the stakeholders involved. And I think to the points we have mentioned early, maybe tying a bow on one of these points, which is access to power. In the SMB and mid-market space, sure, you can maybe ask about power, but oftentimes the companies have a good sense for the problem they're solving. And if they get a sense it's real, they have no problem introducing you to those people. So you don't have to sit there and multiple times tell them, we will not move forward with a custom demonstration until we understand how this is done.
Yeah.
We will not move forward with a free POV until we speak to the person that is signing this document. Because the second you give free trials, you have lost 2 months of your life chasing down something that 3 weeks in and they haven't made any progress, you realize is going nowhere.
Yeah.
And I think like all that to say, I am not a guy who's going to sit here and say process, process, process. But I think this is the biggest thing that seems overwhelming because it's an uncomfortable style of question. But when you anticipate this objection and resistance coming up already as like day one in the enterprise role, and you build this into your discovery workflow, just like you've got a good workflow now in the SMB and corporate space, it's much more approachable and much more manageable. It's a really hard muscle to develop to tell someone, like I'm working with a really big e-commerce company right now that wants to do a trial. We have a lot of things going for us, but we have to hold off and like pump the brakes until we get there, until we have this information. So really great examples. And maybe as another point as well, like I mentioned going on site, are there ways that you, maybe let's take the specific example of an active deal. You do have this low to mid-level person that is very smart, very capable, but doesn't have a lot of influence. How do you go potentially around them, or how are you, if they're not willing to take you to that person or give you the things you need, what is your approach or the few things you're going to start doing right away?
My first option is not to go around them and to try and get them to introduce me to that person I need. And that's just by putting in the work and helping them understand what you're going to cover on that call with that next, whether it's the VP of IT or VP of Finance, whatever title you're trying to get to, clearly lay out, here is exactly what I'm going to cover with them on that call. And I found that to be the easiest way. Like if that's not happening, I think that's when the alarm bell should start to go off. If you need to go around them, then I'm just going to go to that next person, whoever that decision maker is, and show them what exactly the same thing. Here's exactly what I want to cover with you. Here's what I've covered thus far with this person, and try and just, that's not ideal to go around them, but if I have to, that's what I'll do. But my first option is to always get the champion I'm working with. And if I'm doing the right things and we're going through the process the right way, and I've clearly laid out, here's what we're going to cover on that call and why it's going to be relevant to them and a good use of their time, I've found not much pushback when you do that the right way.
Yeah, well said. Yeah, and I think, maybe outside the scope of this conversation of how do you do that the right way, because then that gets into a lot of low-level tactics. But no, I think this is a great overview, and maybe, whether it's prospecting or other elements of this, what comes to mind in terms of other changes that we maybe haven't, really specified yet?
In terms of prospecting, I think a lot of the principles are the same in terms of getting people for initial interest, but in the SMB space, you have to use your time more carefully. At least from my experience, I sell a pretty heavy product. It's expensive. Even in its cheapest form, it's expensive on an annual basis. It's expensive to implement, and it takes a long time to implement. So in an SMB and even mid-market territory, you might have, let's just say like 1,200 accounts or something, maybe 2,000 accounts. A large percentage of those aren't even going to be viable targets. So it's more figuring out which ones meet criteria in terms of, can they even afford the product? Is there a good use case for the product? And figuring out where you should be spending your time. Enterprise, you oftentimes have a lot less accounts. Like you might have 10, 15 accounts. You might have the subsidiaries. So you break it up between being more strategic, breaking into the enterprise parent company, but then there's also an opportunity to prospect, at least where I am, into the subsidiaries that may or may not own the solution that the parent company owns. And that's kind of how I think about it.
Yeah, 100%. And I think like so many great nuggets here. I guess, I don't know, is there anything beyond that we haven't covered? Because I feel like this is a deep conversation.
No, I think this is worthy of a part two as well, because I think a lot of people again, I was saying earlier, tough transition from SDR to even that SMB account executive role. I think that's one of the bigger transitions in like a 5 to 7 year tech sales career. But going from SMB mid-market, a lot of those core principles that make you successful in that role apply. But I think what we covered today really sums up well some of those things you should be thinking about if you are preparing for a transition like that.
Yeah, and I think maybe, just restating call to action for anyone watching too. Like if there's specific examples or you want us to talk more about any of these topics, like comment below. We literally check this every day. So we would love to dive deeper and have you inform where we go next. Connor, great conversation. Like I mentioned, his channel is also in the description as well. 6+ years at Oracle, 5-time MVP, held every role there. And if you got it this far, like and subscribe. We always appreciate that. And if you are looking for extra guidance, Connor is also on our team at higherlevels.com. But nonetheless, a lot of call outs there. But appreciate it, everybody. We'll see you guys on the next one.
See you guys.